people just don't trust HR, and they're told sometimes by the organization or their leaders not to trust HR.
Do you really think this is important for an organization to be titled as a best place to work?
There's a such thing as giving and receiving. So it's not just the manager giving that feedback. You should be also listening to what is shared there.
Hey everyone, I'm Shivani Pande and welcome to the HR Club. In today's episode, we'll uncover a few things about workplace culture that will certainly pique your interest. What culture truly means, culture fit versus culture contribution, and explore how diversity changes organizations. Stay tuned till the end because we'll share real-world examples and best practices that you can apply. To share insights at length, I'm thrilled to welcome Tiffany Castagno as our guest for today. Tiffany is the CEO and founder of Cepher, bringing over 15 years of experience in building people programs. She's passionate about building strong workplace cultures and working with leaders to foster inclusivity. With expertise spanning across various industries, she's known for her commitment to aligning HR practices with business goals. Tiffany, it's an honor to have you with us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Shivani. This is great. I'm excited to get into today's conversation.
Likewise. And while we start this conversation, Tiffany, I have to admit, with something which I've been holding on to myself for a while now, that the first time when I got an opportunity to speak with you on a call, and your energy and enthusiasm talking about anything and everything of workplace cultures definitely took me aback. And I knew you were the right person to speak about this theme at length. So curious to know what really excites you or what really encourages you to dive deeper into the topic of workplace cultures.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I wholly receive it. And that's a great way to start the day. For me, it's a lot of it really is baked from not having good experiences in the workplace myself and wanting to shift that for other people. I was having a poor employee experience. I was watching other people around me have a poor experience. Then that just doesn't feel good, right? And I thought we shouldn't have to feel like this. The other piece of it is that other HR professionals who I worked with who were supposed to be supporting us were not really, they either weren't knowledgeable, and I don't mean that in a dismissive way, but they weren't willing to get the knowledge or follow up if they didn't know the answer. And it felt like we were just a number at times. And so that's really what sparked my HR career, is wanting this to look differently and, just caring about people at the heart of it. And I've never looked back since. My mom tells me that I was born to do this.
Really happy to hear that. Picking up from what you shared, so of course, all of us in the HR space, we talk a lot about culture, day in, day out. But how do you think other stakeholders see it? So basically, before I jump onto the question of what rightfully culture is, I would love to know what are some of the maybe bizarre ways that you have seen people define workplace culture?
I mean, fluffy comes to mind. People think it's just some nebulous word out there. What does it really mean? The other piece is that people don't always realize that it's going to exist, whether you create it or not. I've heard people say, well, we don't want all that corporate stuff. It introduces bureaucracy. It's going to cost me a lot of money. We hear the same thing with, DEI topics as well. But I think, people just have this strange attachment to the word itself. And I think that there's a belief out there that it's just something that we say to make it pretty. It's just something HR started using to make themselves, sound, like they're doing more and they're really helping the organization, which if you don't believe that culture is changing your organization or has the capacity to, and even give you a competitive advantage, then, it might be time to re-examine some things.
Absolutely. So on that note, have you ever come across any outlandish cultural practices or coming across an organization focusing on certain superficial perks that overshadowed deep cultural needs?
Yeah, I think that sometimes what we see is, which, becomes a part of the culture, but we see that people start making excuses for poor behavior and saying, that's just how, this person is. or overlooking it because maybe they're their best, you know, producer or salesperson, from a metrics or KPIs perspective. And I think just also people make strange excuses in terms of, just those types of poor behaviors and why certain policies got into place or why they won't put certain policies into place. And I've just seen kind of a myriad of excuses for that. I myself have, been in leadership and trying to help shift the culture, enhance the culture. And when you look at, who is given headcount in an organization for their department, I've had mine taken away. And it's like, well, we need sales. And so they need all the resources. And you're like, well, if we don't give people good resources, how does that shape a good culture? Because now we're impacting engagement and retention.
Yeah, can't agree more because some of those examples that you shared, I might have myself heard them among my peers out in the ecosystem sometimes, or if not peers, at least a lot of people who are in non-HR or even non-leadership space who may not understand the real essence of the term uh, might build certain understanding without knowing the essence of it. So with that, what do you think is the right way to define workplace culture? If somebody asked you today, or if you found someone quoting workplace culture in a wrong way or with misperception, how would you correct them?
I would share that it should be built based on values. And that should really be where it starts. But a lot of companies don't recognize that, or they have values on their website, but they're not really lived out in practice. And so that would be a great way. What are the values that are shaping how you behave every single day as a leader and as, individual contributors? How do your customers see you? It's really even this feels, a little fluffy when I say that, it really is everything that shapes everything in an organization, the fiber of the organization. And I believe it's how, it lives and breathes, and it is shifting. I always tell people that it's shifting because when the organization and the people change, when the vision may change, so does the culture. And so we get a beautiful chance to impact that. And people don't always realize they think it's set. We have our values and it stays there, but culture will always be moving.
Understood. I think couldn't have defined it better. On that note, I have, of course, come across organizations, mostly in the ones which are larger in size, which have more resources in place, built very strong frameworks or sign up on tools that they use to set up culture assessments during their hiring processes when they bring new people on board. So while growing, companies are putting a lot of effort and resources in building culture assessments, but at the same time, there are employees who are currently the part of the workforce and are shaping the culture daily. So how does a leader, either any functional leader or specifically an HR leader, influence culture in that scenario? Because while you are making sure what a culture looks like, culture fit looks like when you bring in new people, but at the same time, there are people inside your organization who've been there for years while things evolved. How do we take care of that?
I think it's important to understand what's happening in the business. And so one thing that has happened over time as HR has even evolved into more people and culture has really been to know the business. There's also a myth out there that we don't care about the business. We don't know, we're overhead, right? And so those are some of the things that happen too. But one of the greatest things that I've been able to do to impact culture and help shape these frameworks is to sit down once a month, if not more frequently, with the business leaders that I supported so that I understood we had dedicated time and space, not just for challenges that arose, but like as a real thought partner. And we were able to then be seen as thought leaders. And that's a practice that when I started Cepher, I kept that with me. And it continues to be a stronghold for support for the organization, for really this co-creation that needs to happen, because we shouldn't be in the business of telling folks what to do, but more working in concert with them. And so that's one of the biggest ways I would say that could happen when we're able to really be a guide, but we also understand the business so that they feel seen, heard, valued, and appreciated.
Understood. But talking about existing employees and how they can contribute to the culture of an organization as it grows, are there certain ways in which leaders or the business can empower existing employees to embody and evolve the culture? Are there any practices that you might have come across? Set up yourself for this.
I think, I love this question because I think this is very undervalued very often. I don't know that employees always realize the way that they can do this within each other as colleagues. And I think that leaders, often forget this or just aren't aware. And so social media is one great way. Some companies have very strong feelings about that, or they don't want people posting on there, or they want to make sure that they're not speaking on behalf of the company. Absolutely. But at the same time, or as a spokesperson, but it is good for the brand to have those ambassadors, those employee ambassadors talking up your company. I know that when we vet clients, we're looking to see what are people saying about them on social media, on the Glassdoors of the world, and all of those things. So, and it also means as colleagues being kind to one another and having grace and understanding, supporting where you can, and being flexible with each other, just as, you may expect your employer to be flexible. I think that those are some of the great ways. Mentorship is a great thing too. It's a great tool. Setting up a buddy system when someone comes on so that they have someone and they feel like there's a reason that Gallup has, do you have a best friend at work as a question, because it connects people.
Well, I love that part about asking people if you have a best friend at work, because I've personally, not gonna lie, I've personally used that question sometimes, and it takes people aback sometimes because they're like, okay, am I supposed to have like actual friends at work? And why is HR asking me that? Are they gonna ask questions to my friend about what am I thinking? What am I talking about? But I understand where it how it adds immense value to somebody feeling somebody having the emotion or feeling belonging to the place that they are associated with if they have built close relationships. So love that suggestion. Um, in addition to it, while there are these multiple ways in which organizations can basically empower their existing employees, but when it comes to adding new people, there's also a lot of debate around, okay, culture fit or culture contribution, because you also don't want to risk bringing in the wrong people into the system while trying to not walk on thin ice, but still making sure that whom you have brought on board, they fit well into where you are, or what your team thinks, how they work. What do you think about that? Which one should an organization focus on? Or if that's so, what works best for organizations at different stages?
I really like this too. And I love the term. So thank you for gifting that to me. Culture contribution, because often we hear it said as culture fit or culture add. And I think people really, they really bristle when you say culture add, especially from a, you know, ethnic, racial, when people, are part of a marginalized or oppressed group. Then, they may feel like, what do you mean? Like, of course I'm adding to it. You hired me, didn't you? And so people don't like to feel like they're put in boxes. And the reality is when you are brought into an organization and you're hired on, there is a component of fit and fit to the skill set, fit to the culture. Um, and if an organization is doing it right, then you have these principles in place to allow for inclusion and belonging, and you've done all the right things for that to be the case. But I love the way that you phrase it of culture contribution, because we should be hiring people who want to contribute. And this comes back to the values too. We really want to make sure when we're putting interview questions together that it is for someone to come in and be able to effectively contribute versus feeling like they have to fit into a box. I know that I have had that experience on more than one occasion, and it does not feel good to feel like you're just being put into a box and this is your lane and you must stay in it. Doesn't allow for growth.
Got it. But have you also come across any instances and experiences where you would have seen that hiring for culture contribution may may lead to the organization's culture philosophy being compromised if not done well? Do you remember any? Do you have any top of the mind memory of certain instances where you would have seen that, okay, in the interview process, certain things could have been done differently to avoid the blockers. But unfortunately, trying to bring in diversity did not go the way it was expected.
Yes, and I think that this is a very timely question and topic. So thank you for that too, Shivani. I think that um often and I had this conversation within the last couple of months before the holidays where people were sharing that they weren't feeling, even though they were hired, they felt like they were being tokenized, basically. That I was just hired because I'm of a certain ethnicity, but this environment was not set up for me and it wasn't really ready. And from a readiness factor, it's not fair to have folks join the organization when you're not prepared for them. If you say you want to increase diversity and you want your workplace to be reflective of the communities you serve and the customers you serve, well, what are the types of things that you need to do? And often it's because we haven't asked enough questions or we haven't listened and we're doing it in a performative way and checking a box. And that's never going to be good for us. So I've heard the experiences of employees when that happens, and I've been that employee as well. Like, you hired me for my expertise. I've also been asked as an HR practitioner, you know, how do I, and as a Black woman, very well-intentioned, well, how do I bring, I want to hire more Black folks or I want to hire more Black women. How do I do that? And I find that somewhat offensive. And while it's okay to have some, targeted goals, it's not necessarily the right approach because there's work behind it. You can't just say, oh, I want this and it appears, right? We have to do the work.
Understood. Glad that you brought that up, Tiffany. I would definitely be circling back with more questions on that topic. But before that, there are a few other things I would love to dive deeper into when it comes to building culture of intent in an organization, because there's one way where HR sets up certain practices, works with leaders or founders or the CEO or other leaders come up with certain recommendations on how their teams or everybody across the org should be behaving in a certain way. But having said that, what can an organization do to build a culture of intent internally, right from the stage new person is on board, right from the onboarding stage of a new employee? What are certain things that a company can do?
I really love the practice of reaching out to folks before they even start. So to me, that is when onboarding begins. And a lot of folks don't do that until it's like, okay, their desk is ready, their computer's ready, we have all the access, they're going to come to orientation. But really warm them up before they even get there. You spent all this time getting them ready and making an offer, and you don't want them to lose that excitement along the way. And so I love a, reach out call from the manager or an email saying, dress code, here's where to park, someone's going to come meet you. Don't bother to bring a lunch, because we're going to take you to lunch, things of that nature. And really having a strong 30, 60, 90 onboarding plan is one of my go-tos. Pro tip there, because people feel it when you feel like you're not ready. I remember one of my coworkers came to his desk and he was just like, nothing was ready for me. I've had that experience too. He's like, my manager wasn't around. And that's just not a great experience. And sometimes we understand managers have to travel and things like that. But I think especially in this environment where a lot of folks may be remote, and especially if you're a remote first company, we have to understand that, making people feel special, maybe send a gift their way or a lunch if you're not going to be able to take them in person or you are remote first. So even I love having new team members write up their own bio so that clients and internal folks get to know and other stakeholders get to know them, who they are personally as well.
Understood. So let's say this is about before a person is on board. And I love the suggestion where, of course, building that personal connect before somebody is actually coming in, or what we popularly call it as day zero, so that they feel they already belong in the organization. How can an organization or an HR team play a part here where this person can get the right understanding of what this company's culture is like and eventually build through it?
Yes, one of the things that I know I have a couple clients who do this. I did this when I was working in corporate to really be a partner as HR, not just to leaders, because sometimes there's a misperception that we're only there for leaders or the organization and to protect them. I would have coffees with employees and just understand. And it's not that I was like digging for dirt or something like that, but truly to get to know them. And people came to appreciate that. I looked forward to it. It was a break in all of our day. So being able to do that, but I will say also, as HR, supporting the managers and making sure they have the tools and understanding. So even leadership development, or helping employees connect to the tools in the organization beyond orientation, asking questions that are thoughtful and meaningful around their employee experience and getting to know them on a personal level so that you build a level of trust. Because for some reason, people just, well, there are some reasons that are truly valid at times. People just don't trust HR, and they're told sometimes by the organization or their leaders not to trust HR. And so if we build a different, perception and a different type of relationship, that's one of the key ways that we can support employees and have them feel comfortable and psychologically safe with us if there are questions or they run into a concern.
Love what you shared about the trust factor, Tiffany, because I have had a personal experience where in one of my past stints where I found a challenge being friends with certain team members from a different function, because in the initial days when I tried to befriend them, they thought because from HR, I'm probably being an undercover agent to
Mhm.
find out what's going on and get all the gossip, while it was not at all the case. I was really trying to be friends with them. So been there, and I still hear that. So glad that you brought that up. Are there any things that you think managers or senior leaders can do specifically to break that ice? Because I hear this often from team members. Of course, I have seen it a lot in the startup space where the teams are really lean. People are working much closely compared to a larger organization where teams are distributed, right? So in a smaller setup, it's maybe still easier for people to build relationships because you're sitting right next to each other, interacting more often offline and not just online. So that helps. But I do hear people sometimes think that, okay, my manager has asked me to step out to have a coffee with them or lunch with them. Um, do they have something down their sleeve? Why are they calling me? Why do they want to have lunch with me? Is there a motive behind it? So how can managers break that ice, or leaders break that ice?
Yeah, I think I'm chuckling because I've had that situation too. And I'm pretty sure every single one of us, when you get a call or an email or a manager stop by and say, do you have a minute? It's like the anxiety immediately rises. Like, something's wrong. That's where we immediately go to. But it's also physiologically, and neurologically, like we have this fight or flight response, right? So this is where building that culture of inclusion and belonging, not pushing off one-on-ones constantly so that, it's perceived that you're doing things that are more important or you're constantly shifting priorities, which that can happen. But explaining the why is one big thing to trust, because we have to trust our leadership or there's not going to be a feeling of safety. And we are going to feel like, okay, they want to go to lunch, something's up. Whereas we really want to have people see that as an opportunity, like, wow, I get to spend time with my manager and I can ask questions and I can share what I've been working on or things of that nature. I had one of my managers invite me over. I had worked at a different site and she invited me to her office, which was like kind of across town. And I was like, what is up with that? This isn't our normal one-on-one. I'm not really sure what to expect. And she actually promoted me. And so, just an example of where it can go well. And this is with someone I trusted. So it shows you the level that we really have to continue building relationships. Because even when someone trusts you, there can still be this skepticism.
If you had to give a piece of advice to, let's say, a new team member coming into an organization, because everything that we are speaking about here, of course, it helps leaders, HR people to understand what they can do right. But at the same time, on the part of a team member for whom all of this is being done, they come with their own past experiences, because of which sometimes they might find it a little trouble in putting in trust right away. Of course, they would have their own timeline to build into it. What's that one piece of advice you would like to give new team members coming on board when it comes to the idea of unlearning the past experiences?
Some people will say that trust has to be earned. I think that's true in many circumstances. But I would say, sometimes when we bring past biases or, there's some very real harm and trauma that has happened in workplaces. I am not dismissing that at all. But if it's possible to explore with fresh eyes, which usually when someone has joined a new team, if they left a bad workplace, they're coming for some invigoration and they want to meet new people and contribute ideas, and they want to be in a safe workplace. And so I would say to be open and to ask questions and make sure that you're fully exploring, what may be going on if you are running into an issue. And also, seeking out HR, talking to your manager, asking questions of your colleagues if you're having a disagreement or seeing things from different perspectives is really healthy, because otherwise we may make some assumptions, and I've been here too, and we attach it to, oh, here we go, this is just like the last place, or this person doesn't have my best interest at heart, and we may be making some assumptions there.
Right, got it. What could be certain systems or mechanisms that either the HR team or the leaders can put in place to ensure that not just the new hires, even the existing employees, they have the right forums to bring forward their voice? What could certain systems be?
Yeah, I mean, I think starting with like daily startups, or I'm sorry, daily stand-ups, daily huddles, professional development, and if you have an employee resource group, being able to, have people give a voice there, your team meetings or an all hands, all staff meeting. Because sometimes what we see is that people say, oh, your voice matters, or we have an open door policy, right? That one's famous. And then you walk around and everyone's door is shut, or you go in and they have that look. And I've heard this from employees, and I've experienced it myself, where it's like, oh, well, I walked over to my leader, but they had a scowl on their face, or you could tell they don't want to be bothered, or their body language. And so we have to be really mindful of those things too. But I would say making sure that there are feedback mechanisms. So beyond performance management, yes, maybe you do them quarterly, or you're always doing check-ins and feedback loops. That's great. You want to have some feedback mechanisms in the organization that allows for maybe some correction if you're saying things are wrong. Engagement surveys, stay interviews, exit interviews. Hopefully, we should be still doing something from exit interviews if someone maybe leaves us for a new opportunity. But understanding that there are tools where we can always be better and have continuous improvement. But team meetings are a great way to do that. You could have someone lead the meeting and rotate that. That seems to be pretty common with a lot of people. If you have topics, you can do that, or you can allow someone to pick a speaker about a topic that they want to learn about from a different area or function in the organization. So many great ways that you can really do that.
Understood. Picking up one of the examples that you shared about either surveys or pulse checks, what thoughts on doing surveys with anonymity and non-anonymity? Uh, how to identify that? Because if it's anonymous, a lot of times you get hard feedback, which is great because then you know what to fix basically. But you don't know how much to what its intensity you need to dive into it. You don't know the background story of it. While if it's identified where the identity is known, people may not always be comfortable with it because they feel, okay, what if it comes back to me in a way which I do not want? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, another great question. And I work with some clients on this too, because there is, often they want to, it comes from a good place where, well, what if we get some really tough feedback and we really just want to dig into it more? Fair, and that's great. There are ways that we can do that too. My personal recommendation is always anonymous, because it creates a safe space. Because even when you do an anonymous survey, people are still skeptical and they're like, is there a way you can track this back? And even if you say, hey, we're working with this third party and they're not going to tell us, or, hey, we've situated it such that we're not able to tell, people aren't always going to believe that. And so we have to be careful about, what that is. I would also say that, there are things like focus groups that we could do, or you could do follow up. I always try to share with folks that this actually is a good thing. If you get some hard feedback, you can always have another touch point to either say, hey, here's a person that you can talk to, whether that's HR or third party, to be able to have a conversation around if you have some concerns to report it to. And that's a role that I've played with clients and their teams. You can also have it where You open up focus groups if you're willing to share, anonymously. Leadership will be in there and we'll kind of understand. And sometimes people do put leaders in there. It really just depends. So it's about getting curious and what are your goals with an engagement survey from or any survey from the beginning. What are you looking to get? That makes a difference.
Understood. Since we are talking here about building certain mechanisms, systems for people so that their voice is heard, that also brings me to a few other points that I would love to hear your thoughts and suggestions on. Since you work with organizations across geographies of different sizes, and primary audience of our podcast is going to be a lot of founders, a lot of HR professionals, either early in their career or the ones who are with an organization which is in an early stage. So when a company still in their early stages are trying to figure out what are some top few most critical people systems that or frameworks that they should set up, because over time there would be a lot of things, but right now you're just getting started, you're just growing the team, you can't do everything at once. What are certain frameworks that a company can set up to make sure that they have their culture integrated in the process?
Yeah, and I think from the hiring piece, it's really supporting that you've done your due diligence in terms of the interview questions, that those are thoughtful to bring on the right person and to create the right experience. Often it's like, well, what do we need as an organization? It should also be, what does this person, what are they going to get out of this experience, and what would we like their experience to be? So that's where onboarding is huge. I think there's a level of strategic planning that needs to happen in the organization in terms of, what do these departments look like? How are we trying to connect tools and systems and understanding that so that the organizational chart itself even makes sense and that we make sure that we're setting folks up for success under the prescribed values. I would also say making sure those feedback, when we talk about performance, that those feedback loops are there, that we have a strong system, because too often I hear that it's not consistent or it's just not happening, or it happens once a year, or worst case, people are getting surprised by not good things when they could have improved along the way. I would also say professional development is key, and making sure that people understand what's their career ladder, career lattice. What does that look like in terms of movement and growth in the organization, while understanding that not all growth is vertical. As one of my mentors told me long ago, some people want, they're happy with job enrichment. So making sure you have some tools in place for that is going to be critical, which is, a driver of engagement and retention.
Understood. Talking about the recruiting side of things, one thing I hear a lot from people, because a part of my role also involves hiring actively, and a lot of candidates, they come up with this question in the first call, which is, can you tell me more about the culture of your company? And when that question comes up, I mean, my usual response is, okay, I mean, there would be a lot of things that I can share, but what do you count in as culture? What will I share will be the right response for you? So taking this into context, what would your advice or suggestion be based on your experience? Because a lot of times, even candidates may or may not have the right understanding of what it is. So what should be a right response from a recruiter when they're asked about, tell me about your company's culture, without really sounding like we are sugarcoating it?
Well, and this is where, if you're living out your values, I do believe that anchoring on the values that you've built this organization on, that hopefully is threaded throughout the culture and that everyone understands, like, what does it mean when we say that, one of our values is having purpose and meaning at work? Well, what does that mean to someone who doesn't know you and who is supposed to now trust you, right? So really helping people understand these are our values, and this is what we believe, and this is what it means, and here's how your role can connect to it. That's how I've always responded to that question as a recruiter and as a hiring manager. But I think, a lot of people may see it as fluff, like, okay, that's generally what they should say. But this is where hopefully your social media presence, your employer brand, all of that is tied together nicely, where people are having a good experience. Because what people also do now, they're very savvy, is they'll go out on LinkedIn or something and they'll ask other people, what's your experience been like working here? So you really want that thread to follow all the way through your culture and have it be meaningful, but also things that you're actually doing.
Understood. Okay. On that note, what are your, I mean, since we're talking about, again, adding new people to the team, what are your thoughts on whether it's important for new founders or the organizations just starting off to address D&I? Should that be something which should be a priority for them at the foundation stage? Or do you think that helps avoid any systematic issues later?
Yeah, I think we should all always be thinking about that. And so if I'm doing a presentation to founders who are thinking about recruiting for the first time, building a team, I will always talk about DEIB and the importance of it and how people need to feel like they're included and belong. And a lot of what we're talking about are things that I share with them. Here's how you can set up a good onboarding experience. Here are the steps to recruiting. And that may mean going into some outreach and doing that. So I'm really trying to help them as they're building their organization to start to think about these things so that they do it the right way from the start. And it's the same with organizations who are existing for a while, really, and saying, hey, you're going to set up your HR department for the first time. Let's make sure that it's done in a way that is welcoming and inclusive and where people feel like they have a voice and belong. So I think it's always critical.
Got it. What are certain things that you have come across in your conversations with people over time that they get wrong about diversity hiring?
I think a lot of it is what I've heard where I've seen it go wrong is where they are focused on a certain ethnicity or a certain type of person, or they're comparing, someone and they've made this long laundry list of what this person needs to be. And it's like, what does the organization actually need? I think that that's a big gap in terms of trying to fill big shoes sometimes, so to speak, of someone. Maybe you had a high performer and you really want the next person to do well and be successful. But this is a great time to pause and say, what is it that the organization actually needs? Because again, I've seen the wrong environment set up for people when they do get it wrong. And people are not then having a good employee experience.
Understood. Talking about employee experience there, what are certain things that you think can not work in favor of leaders or an organization if they have in their foundation stages, foundation years, have not put enough thought and effort into focusing on D&I?
I mean, we know that there is a business case, which should make it a business priority for D&I. I think that what happens is we see turnover. We start to see people checking out. They start to become absent or unproductive. There's toxicity in the workplace. People are afraid to make mistakes. And it just, and of course, maybe I mentioned turnover, but that's, people are not going to stay in an environment like that if they don't feel like they can trust their leader, and or sometimes we hear that they don't trust their colleagues. We want to build a foundation of trust, and that means that everyone has to work together to make that happen. You can't just have it be from leadership side and then employees are, doing things that are not kind to each other and making the environment terrible, and then even worse if that's allowed. So we really want to be mindful of those types of things too, because it will ultimately lead to dissatisfaction, disengagement, people checking out. It might be worse than them not leaving because now they're not even productive and you're paying them, or the turnover we spoke of.
Since you spoke about the business case integration here and also about how it affects internal engagement, just for the understanding of our listeners and so that they know better, how does it tie to a business case in addition to cultural value?
Yeah, I mean, we're in an age where certain accreditations, certifications are tied to that. So if you want to be seen as an employer of choice, if you want to be seen by suppliers and receive opportunities, the folks are wanting these organizations to represent the community that they are a part of. And I too often hear people say, well, we're in a rural area and that's just not possible. There's many ways that diversity exists. And so there's something that I call celebrate your current state, which is how do you have, someone came to me and said, how do we promote more women? And I'm like, I'm looking at the composition of your workforce and you have lots of women. So there's a gap that you're not promoting them. Something is happening in that environment. And so I think, that's definitely something that I would have people consider in terms of, just thinking about the different ways that you can interact with that. And really, when people are in the organization and you've brought them in, you've spent all this money training and hiring and doing all these things to have them go out the door, that's your dollars right there. And it is not cheap. Now you have to put new ads up. Now you're pulling people away from different things that they could have been working on because maybe they're a part of the interview panel, or your leadership recruitment takes a long time, and it should, because it should be intentional. So now leadership, instead of working on those strategic goals, is back to, not that hiring isn't strategic, but they're back to square one of doing all these things and reviewing resumes, and it's not effective. So that creates waste. It creates financial and other resource waste.
And let's say, in addition to talking about gender diversity, or in addition to talking about diversity of ideas, there's one more part of it, which is generational diversity that I've come across, and also have seen organizations and teams sometimes finding it challenging to work that around, because um, if we talk about Gen Z today or millennial, there's a lot of difference in the style of working or what they demand from a workplace. And that has sometimes caused conflicts in teams, or differences in expectations between the managers, leaders, and the teams. Even certain dissatisfaction when it comes to having somebody from a younger generation reach a leadership role. There's a lot of flip that happens. What are certain ways that you think organizations can avoid or fill that gap, I would say?
Yeah, I think, this is one of those things where right now we have the most generations in the workforce. And there's a little bit of a collision of perspectives, I would say, and even skill sets, because I identify as Generation X, and folks are, I have had differences of perspective in folks in the baby boomer generation, as well as, millennials. And so there's just different ways of working. We've grown up with different technologies. AI right now is like advancing quickly. And so what I've always told teams, especially now in this age of technology, and what I've always practiced, and this has to be true more so now, is that we should be embracing the wisdom of those who came before us, and we should be learning from those who are coming after us. We have each such a rich opportunity to imprint on one another and to share our knowledge and to learn new things. But it requires us to be open. It requires us to ask curious questions as well. And so that's what I would say about that, because I think that so often it's like someone just wants to be right, or that person's too young, or they should just retire, which are just completely inappropriate and not accurate.
Do you think there is something fundamentally right or wrong with an organization or startup being just startup having folks with um, just one generation? Do you think things can go right or wrong, or do you think that's not something that would bother anything inside the company, either in terms of their culture or the business?
Love these questions. You just keep me on my toes. I think because that is something that's reality, right? So it's a good question. We see like, oh, either that experience is felt because people are like, oh, they just got rid of me because they wanted to bring in new generations, but it's super common and pretty well known that not that I want to blanket stereotype startups, but it is pretty common that there is a younger generation. And typically we see it's because there's like innovation, especially in the tech space. And those are the folks, and that's a fast growing sector. So often, that may be the case for different reasons. So again, when we look at founders and new folks thinking about this D&I, we really want to make sure that we're focused on the right things and that we're building it so that people don't feel like, oh, it's only for, a certain generation or for quote unquote young folks. Because that's a very subjective term too.
Absolutely understood. I mean, of late, at least if I look back to some of the data points or articles that we came across over the last few months, which is late 2024, quite a few large organizations. And when I say large organizations, some of them are even the leaders in their space, either. And here we're talking about, let's say, the Meta of the world, the Walmart or the Lowe's of the world, where they started to walk back from their DEI efforts. citing different social, economic, political reasons. Knowing that, what are your thoughts, or what are your top of the mind? Yeah, I'll stick to thoughts, which is around global inclusion challenges based on what we have observed in the last few months.
Ooh, yeah, I always, every time I approach this conversation, I have to take a breath because I do feel a great sense of disappointment in these organizations that could and should be leading the way, rolling this back. And this has impacted people's livelihood. People have lost their jobs. It's impacted their sense of self-worth, their opportunities to earn and really drive the economy, which is a big piece when we look at global inclusion, is that workplaces are made up of different folks. And you may be working, your company may be global. And so we need to be inclusive in thinking about these things and how it impacts. There may be something from a language perspective that now you don't have this experience or expertise, or you don't have the perspectives in the organization because you've chosen to roll back this. I think it just really is quite a shame. And we have basic human needs to feel like we belong, and we have a human need and right to belong. So, I feel like taking these benefits away, rolling back DEI departments and all of that, taking those focuses, those initiatives away, it says you don't care about your people. And that may feel like a bold statement to people, but I think we have to tell the truth, and we have to be honest with ourselves about that. And these are large companies. And so typically you would say, we were talking about the business case earlier, and it's going to lose you money if you're doing that. And people probably think, oh, they have all this money. Well, it's going to impact in other ways too, because even the folks who are still there are going to feel a certain type of way because they're watching their colleagues get let go, or they're feeling like, hey, wait a minute, if we're doing this, what does this mean? And then they're not going to be on these sought after best places to work lists. I think, you know, um, at the end of the day, the people are what matter, and this can cause people to feel harmed and not safe. And that seems to have been dismissed in this process, and it really deeply concerns me.
Do you think such decisions by the organizations which carry a legacy which have a brand identity, it does impact their customer loyalty and brand reputation as well?
Absolutely. I believe that wholly. Um, I think that if you're doing that, then you're also telling your customers that you don't care. This goes back to, what is the representation, especially some of these companies, you're working across the world. And so I think it does send a message. And we also see, I hear it from employees in organizations all the time, that people choose to not support them. And if you maybe are in a rural area and maybe one of these companies is the only place that you can shop for groceries or something, I've heard people say things like, well, I'm only going to use a credit card, and then they have to pay these fees to impact different things, so that they have to feel some of, the heat of that, quite frankly. And so people are getting very creative as to how they will or will not support, organizations who don't uphold, certain belief systems that they and values.
Understood. Thank you for sharing that candidly, Tiffany. It absolutely sounds like it comes from the heart. And saying that, I actually remember while I was going through a lot of content that you write and share on your LinkedIn profile as well. This reminds me, I mean, what you shared right now and how you shared it, it just reminds me of something which I noticed in as a trend in a lot of your content pieces, which is there's a lot of gratitude that it reflects, because I would see the common user words like giving back to the community, appreciating peers, the word blessings. So some of these words are very commonly recurring in your content. On that note, do you think that gratitude in a workplace does play a part in the way an organization looks at its culture and how they want to treat their people or what they want to propagate further?
I think it does. And I think it should, and it has to. I think, we need to say thank you. People, reward and recognition is important. And even if you are saying, we can't financially support, gifts or gift cards or things of that nature, or maybe a holiday bonus, what we can do is thank people. It's free. Gratitude is free. So as colleagues, you asked me before about, how can employees make, build upon the culture? And it's thanking each other. If your colleague helps you out and they stay because you had to leave because your child was sick, you want to be grateful for that so that they do it again. And so that you build this culture of taking care of each other. And I think that that's so important. And for leaders to not just take advantage or make assumptions about the fact that, oh, well, they know that I appreciate them. Well, did you actually say it? And how did you show it? Or did you show up only when there was a project due and then you thanked them? So we have to just really be thoughtful about those things.
Thank you for sharing that. What you said here actually makes me think that probably that's exactly what makes people feel that they belong to the workplace, because that's exactly where it strikes their mind that, oh, what I did here, somebody is thankful about it. Otherwise, it's just nothing. It's very tangible, if I may call it. Um, Summing that up, everything that you have shared as insights about culture, about D&I practices, about how leaders and HR business partners can play a part in building the culture of intent, in building the right practices, about integrating the culture at different in different frameworks and different people systems inside an organization. Um, I would also love to understand, as we head towards closing this conversation, I would love to understand from you, what are certain metrics that you think that can help measure culture and impact of D&I initiatives? Because of course, there's numbers tagged to certain initiatives, but in addition to or beyond numbers, beyond traditional metrics, are there ways where which companies can use to measure the impact of such initiatives?
Yeah, I think for sure that a lot of our qualitative information that we gather in the organization and data is so overlooked and undervalued. And I would say that there's an opportunity to be able to look at things like our state interviews and exit interviews. And while even engagement interviews or engagement surveys have a quantitative perspective, they typically have a kind of a catch-all question at the end. Anything else you want to tell us? Qualitative as well. And so we want to be taking that just as seriously as, while sometimes leaders are driven towards, well, what does the data show me? I want to see the numbers. There's a whole lot of great things that you may be missing in rich data if you don't also look at qualitative. I would say, and that includes performance reviews. When you're getting feedback or giving feedback, there's a such thing as giving and receiving. So it's not just the manager giving that feedback. You should be also listening to what is shared there. Or even when it may come to something that's gone wrong and maybe someone needs to be put on a performance improvement plan, or there's some discipline that has to happen. We always want to be checking ourselves to be like, was it this process? Was it a tool? Did our system fail this person? Versus just making the assumption that it's just them. So getting intentional around even how we set the goals and what goals we set are critical to moving the dial.
That's really helpful. And how about the quantitative side of things? Because, of course, when it comes to a business setup, especially when you're a for-profit business, there would always be leaders who will be asking that, okay, all of this is great, but where are the numbers? Where's the data? What are the quantitative ways to measure it?
Yeah, I love it. And part of what we do with our partners and other stakeholders too is looking at, things like ENPS scores and looking at how are we doing in our customers' eyes. So you can survey your customers to understand what that's like. How are your teams performing? You can look at things like that to improve it, or what is people's understanding? And you should be doing that internally as well as looking at your turnover and retention numbers, because that will tell you a whole lot. We just wrapped up a survey for a client and looking at, where their turnover is happening. And it is amongst people of color. So trying to understand what is impacting that and what can be done in the environment, and starting to do some deep listening around what's impacted. Looking at your employee demographics on the whole, looking at your salary information for internal equity to see how are people paid, and, are white men making more money than women? and people of color, and really looking at diving deep into that. We collect so much data so often, and it just sits there dusty on the shelf. And so, really looking at that information will drive action.
Understood. Okay. And lastly, what are your thoughts on certain forums or organizations out there that sort of recognize other participating organizations as best places to work? Now, there are different means how it's done. There are paid means for it also, while there are some genuine ones. But as an outsider, as somebody who's from in a non-leadership role or non-HR role, and trying to explore an opportunity with a potential employer, what do you suggest should people look at these titles as? In what light should they be seen as? Do you really think this is important for an organization to be titled as a best place to work?
I think, I mean, it sometimes feels like it is just like a money play, because while it does have parameters and people have to, do certain things, I also think that it doesn't always drive the right behaviors, because it feels like more of a marketing ploy to me. And everybody's scrambling towards that. And it's like, where could that money go? Could you put it more towards people getting professional stipends? Could you put it more towards outreach to make a more diverse environment, and an environment where people are going to feel like they belong, and take the time that you're spending on this to really work on your KPIs, to work on your processes and your culture, to make sure that those things are, created for people who are coming on board, because you make a different investment. And so I would say that for the company, in terms of the employee side, I think that, you know, it's great if you do come across an employer that is on that list, but I would say, doing your due diligence across social media, Glassdoor, other EG2, different types of spaces, and just like doing a bit of research to see what else is out there. Because as we know, some things are very performative, and some places are on there as top places to work, and people are having terrible experiences.
Understood. Um, with that, thank you for such an insightful discussion today, Tiffany. I know we have covered a lot of areas, from uncovering nuances of culture to D&I to sharing actionable ways for leaders and organizations. This conversation, honestly, for me, has been both thought-provoking and practical. Your experiences and examples have truly highlighted the impact of all intentional efforts in shaping workplaces of the future. It's been a pleasure to have you on this podcast, and I'm sure our listeners will walk away with a lot to think about and reflect on. Thank you for your time and wisdom once again. I look forward to speak with you again soon.